This is The Streets of Panic Park, which is book 12, the last book in the Goosebumps HorrorLand series by RL Stine, chapter 20. Sabrina pointed to a little tag beside one of the unhappy-looking kids' pictures. I gasped when I read the tag. FTD stands for frightened to death, I said. Kids uttered shocked cries. I felt the metal bracelet on my wrist tingle and grow warm. It meant my fear level was rising. But what could I do? The sad faces on the wall gazed out at me. You mean, Sheena started. I waved to the wall of photos. None of these kids survived the menace, I said. Look at the little sign beneath this photo. It says the kids all died when the fear meter hit 100. They couldn't survive the fear. Huddled close beside me, Luke sighed. What makes us think we stand a chance? He demanded. Stop it, Carly Beth cried. She slid up to Luke. Stop talking like that. Do you think I want to stay a shadow forever? Luke jumped back, surprised by her anger. We're going to survive, even if it hits 100, Carly Beth said. And we're going back home, and we're all returning to normal. She's right, Julie agreed. She was trembling so much it made her voice shake. We've all had scary times before, and we won. We can do it again. Let's go, Matt said. He started to the door. We're not going to get anywhere staring at these photos. We followed him back outside. The air had grown cooler. The sky was a dark charcoal gray. A flock of blackbirds flew overhead, chattering loudly. Matt and Michael trotted up beside Brittany and Molly. Are you sure you can't remember where the building was? Matt asked them. Can't you remember anything else about how you returned to Horrorland? Michael demanded. And then I heard Robbie's voice close to me. Think hard, he pleaded. You both came to the arcade. You were going to bring me back with you to Panic Park. The two girls shut their eyes, thinking hard. It's all fog, Brittany said finally. I remember the white building, Molly said. I remember we walked inside and then... She shook her head. I'm so sorry. It's all a blank. Hey, wait, Sheena cried. I don't believe it. I followed her gaze. She was staring at a tiny building across the path. It looked familiar. And then I saw the sign over the entrance, Hall of Mirrors. Some kids gasped, some cheered. Yes, Boone cried, pumping his fists in the air. That's how we got here. The mirrors will take us back. We didn't hesitate. We all started running. The doors were closed. Was the building locked? Boone got there first. He spread his hands over the doors and pulled them apart. They slid open easily. We piled into the long, narrow room, dark mirrors on both sides. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at the long row of my reflections. Okay, everyone, Matt cried. Into the mirrors. I glanced at my brother. He had a frightened look on his face, but he flashed me a thumbs up. I took a deep breath and leapt into the glass. Chapter 21. Ow! My head smacked hard. My hand slapped the mirror. The glass was solid. In the long row of mirrors, I saw kids tumble back, surprised and disappointed. The room rang out with groans and unhappy cries. Well, that went well, Matt tried to make a joke. But we were all too disappointed to laugh. We stood there, gazing at our dark reflections. Oh no, I uttered a cry as I heard the doors slam shut. The long, narrow room grew darker. Matt and Boone rushed to the door. I watched them struggle to slide it open. We're locked in, Boone cried. Someone locked us in. We're trapped in here. I felt my bracelet tingle and vibrate. Lizzie, be calm, I told myself. Be calm. But how could I? My frightened face stared out at me from the mirrors, and then my face disappeared. Kids cried out as their faces vanished. The mirrors went black. Oh no, I moaned. I stared at the ugly green mask that popped into the mirror. It looked like one of the masks Carly Beth had battled in the maze. It rose up in one mirror, then another, until the hideous mask stared out at us, all down the row. Its rubbery lips bobbed up and down as if it were speaking to us. And then Captain Ben, the one-legged pirate captain, appeared behind the mask. The pirate's evil face grew larger as the mask faded back. He stared out from every mirror, uttering a crooked-toothed laugh. I screamed as an enormous snake rose up, so close it appeared ready to leap from the glass. It raised its head and opened its mouth, snapped its jaws once, twice. A hiss escaped its open mouth, the sound pouring like steam through the tiny room. Dr. Crawler, Boone shouted. I thought he was poisoned. He's still alive. Boone pounded the glass, but the gigantic snake didn't fade away. It shot its head toward us, letting out another frightening hiss. Then a decaying mummy staggered forward in front of us. Its wrappings were stained and peeling. Haunted eyes peered out from deep in its ragged head. The mummy reached its arms out stiffly, grabbing, trying to escape from behind the glass. I saw Abby stagger back. No, please, she cried. But there was nowhere to escape it. The mummy filled the mirrors in front of us and behind us. It's all our old enemies, Carly Beth cried. They're all here, all working for the menace, all here to frighten us. My bracelet. Pain seared up and down my arm as the metal burned into my wrist. The fear meter rose in all the mirrors, and they showed the red line bouncing over 80, creeping higher, higher. We have to get out of here, Matt shouted. He tried the doors again. They wouldn't slide open. He lowered his shoulder and heaved himself at them. No way. He turned back to the mirrors and saw an evil-looking ventriloquist dummy loom up in all of them. His wooden hair stood up in a tall wave. His eyes darted wildly from side to side. He had a leering grin on his face. His jaw made a clicking sound as it moved up and down. Slappy, Brittany and Molly screamed at once. That's Mr. Slappy to you, he screeched. He could hear us. His evil face filled the mirrors. He turned his eyes on Michael. Kid, I've got one word of advice for you. Deodorant. He laughed a tinny laugh. Then his eyes landed on Matt. Do you know how to tell your face from your butt? No, neither do I. Ha 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 ha. You're not funny, Brittany screamed. What do you want? Why did you follow us here? Slappy's mouth clicked open. He leaned forward, peering out at Brittany with that evil grin. Brittany, I think you're pretty. Pretty ugly. Ha ha. I love your nose. Do you open bottle caps with it? Ha ha. His eyes darted from side to side. And where's Robbie? Invisible? Ha ha. Robbie, you never looked better. Maybe you should all make this a more beautiful world and disappear. I stared at the dummy's reflections, my mind spinning. Why was he doing this? Was he just going to make bad jokes? You're all going to disappear like Robbie, Slappy cried in his raspy voice. Your fear level is almost to 100. That means the menace and all us good guys will be returning to Earth. He pressed his wooden face closer. His eyes blinked wide. And do you really think the menace will send you back to your mommies and daddies? I don't think so. Shut up, Brittany shrieked. Shut up, shut up. I hate you. She smacked her fists against the mirror, trying to hit him. I hate you. I hate you. Slappy let out a giggle. He raised a wooden hand. He pointed 2 fingers at Brittany. Let me show you what a wonderful trick the menace taught me. I heard a crackling sound, like an electrical shock. Brittany staggered back. She stumbled into the mirror behind her. Her eyes bulged. Her mouth hung open, and she took wheezing breaths. Slappy pointed the 2 fingers at her again. Again, I heard the crackle of electric current. Brittany let out a moan. Something happened to her face. Her mouth froze open. Her eyes stopped moving. Her face appeared to harden. And then, as I stared in horror, Brittany's whole head hardened. Her skin began to glow like polished wood. An ugly grunt escaped her throat. She raised a hand and pushed under her chin, struggling to close her mouth. Her mouth made a clicking sound as it closed. Slappy laughed. He pointed his fingers at her again. Brittany grunted. Her eyes darted stiffly from side to side. Her head tilted forward, then back. Her mouth clicked as she tried to speak. Ha ha, Slappy laughed. Brittany, dear, I always thought you were a dummy. I was standing right next to Brittany. I reached for her. My hand brushed her head. It was solid wood. Her head was a dummy's head. Slappy peered out from the long rows of mirrors. Who else would like to join my show? He shouted. Chapter 22. The dummy's laugh roared out from all the mirrors. Poor Brittany gripped her wooden head in both hands. Her mouth clicked open, but no sound came out. A wave of horror swept down my body. I pressed my back against the glass and took long, slow breaths. My eyes wandered down the row of terrified kids. Billy and Carly Beth were shadow people. Robbie was invisible. Abby and Julie couldn't stop shaking, and Brittany stood there, grunting and tugging at her wooden dummy head. It's like a horror movie, I thought, and then I told myself, no, it's like living in 10 horror movies at once. We've got to get out of here, Matt shouted. Everybody, think. Yes, why don't you use your brain? Slappy snapped. Use it to ram your head against the door. Ha 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 ha. Slappy's laugh faded as he sank back in the mirror. I gasped as I saw who appeared next, the menace. His black hat was tilted over his face. The collar of his black shirt was pulled up. He looked like a black smudge repeated again and again down the row of mirrors. People, people, he boomed, you're just not trying. He tilted his hat back, but his face was still in shadow. I stared down the aisle. There were dozens of menaces staring back at me. People, the fear meter is only at 80, the menace complained. Really, guys, I expected more from you. Let us out of here, Michael screamed. You can't keep us here, Sheena chimed in. Let us go, several kids started to shout. The menace ignored them. I guess you don't think I'm serious, he said. Let me see. What can I do to prove to you that I mean what I say? My head twirled around. His head twirled around. His other face appeared. Why don't you ask me? I know how to scare these jerks. The first face swung back to the front. I don't think so, he said. You always go too far. The kids never survive your scares. I shuddered. I pictured all those kids' sad faces in the chapel, and the terrifying words, frightened to death. Well, the menace rubbed his chin with a gloved hand. Okay, fine. Go ahead, he said to his other face. Kill some of them if you think I'll get the fear meter to the top. Do whatever you want to them. Chapter 23. Kill some of them? His terrifying words sent chill after chill down my back. You're crazy, Michael screamed. He slapped his hand against the mirror. Matt tried to pull him back, but Michael totally lost it. You're crazy, 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 he shouted at the shadowy face in the mirrors. Michael was so angry the veins were throbbing in his neck. He pounded the mirror again and again. The menace watched him calmly. Under the hat, his eyes were narrow slits. You are a brave lad, he told Michael. Yes, yes, I know you're part monster. I know your whole story, kiddo. It's so impressive the way you stand up to me. His head spun around. So impressive I could puke, the red face said. But really, who is crazy here? The first face said softly. I think I make perfect sense. Just let us go, Michael screamed. I don't care if he stopped. A blinding flash of white light made us all stop. I shut my eyes. The light was so bright, it sent a burning jolt of pain through my head. I opened my eyes slowly and stared in shock at the mirrors. They all appeared to spin, spinning faster and faster until the face in the mirrors was a blur. Michael opened his mouth in a long wail of horror. It was Michael's face in the mirrors, dozens of spinning reflections. Michael's mouth opened, screaming out his rage in every mirror, screaming, his eyes bulging, his face twisted in anger as he spun. Then the scream cut off sharply as the mirrors came to a stop. Darkness fell over us. Silence. A terrified silence down the long room, and then slowly the lights brightened. I struggled to breathe. I saw the other kids shaking their heads, blinking, dazed. And then my eyes stopped on Michael. Michael squinting hard into the mirror in front of him, and on the back of Michael's head, on the back of his head, on the back of his head. My heart skipped a beat. On the back of Michael's head was another face. A hideous monster face with bulging eyes and a long lizard snout, pointed, jagged teeth, and a long black-forked tongue. The menace peered out at Michael from the mirror with a sick grin on his shadowy face. How's that working for you, partner? Glad you complained? Chapter 24. Michael's second face opened its long snout in a monster growl. I screamed. I couldn't hold it in. Some kid stampeded to the exit door and pounded on it frantically. Michael gazed into the mirror, turning his head from side to side. His eyes were wide with horror, but he didn't say a word or cry out. Michael, my boy, the menace called. If you act like a monster, you should look like one. He laughed. Good one, the menace's other face declared. Michael just kept twisting his head around, studying the monster face on the back of his head. Staring as if he didn't believe it. Let us out. Let us go, kids screamed. The menace peered out at us from under the shadow of his hat. I'm enjoying this, people, he said. I'm feeling it. Yes, I'm feeling it. Could you scream a little harder? The fear meter flashed into the mirrors. I stared at the red line. It was bouncing near 95. Almost back, the menace cried. My beautiful park is almost back. I can't wait. What will happen to us? Carly Beth called. Her voice floated out softly from her shadow. If we bring your park back, what will happen to us? The menace pulled the brim of his hat lower over his face. You don't really want to ask that question, do you? The red face whirled around. FTD, it shouted. FTD, FTD. I gasped as gray light flooded the narrow aisle. It took me a few seconds to realize the exit door had opened. We all stood blinking, gazing at the open door. Don't just stand there, people, the menace said. You know how I get when I'm kept waiting. Kept waiting. The last time the menace was kept waiting, he vacuumed up that shadow person. He killed that person just for being slow. I shuddered just thinking about it. Would he do that to us? And then suddenly, different thoughts whirled through my brain. What would happen if we forced ourselves to be calm? What could the menace do if he saw the fear meter drop lower and lower? If he couldn't make us afraid, would he let us go? No time to think about that. Both of the menace's faces were screaming at once. Go out and be afraid. Be very afraid. Go, go, go. We stampeded out the door into the eerie gray light. We need a place to hide, Michael shouted. His monster face uttered a low grunt. Michael's right, Matt agreed. We need to regroup. He stopped. He was staring straight ahead. He let out a sigh. I turned. I saw the ventriloquist dummy first. Slappy, his gray suit and red bow tie. The dummy stood on his own, knees slightly bent, arms dangling at his sides. The painted grin on his lips seemed to spread as he stepped forward. And then the others came into view, moving toward us in a line, an ugly line of evil villains we had seen before, but never in one place, never moving together, never moving as one evil force. Luke huddled close. We all froze with our backs to the Hall of Mirrors, froze in frightened silence and gazed up and down the line of advancing villains. Dr. Crawler, the venomous snake, with his head raised, snapping his jaws. The snake was wrapped around the arm of Inspector Cranium in his white lab coat. As if watching a terrifying nightmare, I saw the green lizard-like monsters from the giant eggs staggering toward us. Captain Ben, his wooden leg tapping the pavement, his skeletal pirates behind him. The ugly, muttering, evil mask floating above the others. Beside it, a staggering, ragged mummy. And Dr. Maniac, cape flying, hovered off the ground as he came forward, his yellow feathered boots kicking the air. We had no choice. We backed up till we were pressed against the wall. My brother raised his face to me and whispered in my ear, We're going to be scared to death just like the kids in that chapel, aren't we, Lizzie? I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. I saw Abby and Julie at the end of the wall. They couldn't stop trembling. Carly, Beth, and Billy were gray clouds fluttering in front of us. Brittany held her wooden head in her hands. Tears rolled down her painted cheeks. Well, well, Inspector Cranium said, rubbing his hands together. A thin, unpleasant smile spread across his bearded face. Well, well, here we all are, the last chapter. Chapter 25. It's your last chapter, Matt shouted. We're not finished yet. Dr. Crawler raised himself on Inspector Cranium's arm. Save your breath, he hissed. Cranium lowered the big snake to the pavement. You're getting heavy, Crawler, he said. How many mice did they feed you today? Bite your tongue, the snake snapped at Cranium. Look at you losers, Slappy said, eyes darting from side to side. Do you really think you stand a chance? Half of you are already shadows or freaks. I'd rather be a freak than a dummy, Robbie yelled. Slappy's body jiggled as he laughed. You've got us all beat, Robbie. You're an invisible freak. Ha 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 ha. Slappy shook his head. And you're also a dummy because you created this clown, he pointed to Dr. Maniac. I'm not a clown, Dr. Maniac roared. I'm a maniac. He swung around to face Slappy. I'd grab you and teach you a lesson, but I'd get splinters. Pipe down, you sea dogs, Captain Ben boomed, waving his crutch wildly. If ye sail with me, you sail as one. It's one for all and all for one. That'd be the rule of the 7 seas. The villains all started arguing at once. Dr. Crawler snapped on Captain Ben's wooden leg, The captain brought his crutch down hard on the snake's middle. "Silence, everyone," Inspector Cranium cried, waving his hands above his head. None of us moved. We stayed with our backs to the building. What was this about? Why were the villains so tense? Why were they at each other's throats? Finally, Cranium got them quiet. He turned back to us. "As I was saying, this is the last chapter, for all of us." "What do you mean?" I cried. "I don't understand. Why is it the final chapter for you?" "Yeah," Luke chimed in. "Don't you work for the Menace?" Cranium nodded. "Yes, we came to work for the Menace. Byron chose us all. He made us a good offer." Slappy's mouth clicked up and down. "The Menace said we could all take our revenge on you losers," he rasped. "You know, you got lucky. You defeated us back home, so he gave us another chance." The snake lifted itself high. "He promised us a good time. All we had to do was scare you out of Horrorland, make you think Horrorland was unsafe." "Aye, and we did a fine job of that," Captain Ben chimed in. "We made you believe that Horrorland was the scariest place," Cranium said, "so you would try to escape to Panic Park." Cranium turned his gaze to me. "It worked, too," he said, "except that stupid horror, Ned. He nearly fouled us up by getting you and Luke involved." "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. "Who is Ned?" He rubbed his pointy beard. "Who do you think Monster X was?" Cranium demanded. Who do you think was desperately feeding you two information about Horrorland? It was Ned. Monster X is Ned." "Ned was trying to help us?" Matt cried. How do you know it was Ned?" I demanded. Cranium shrugged. "I've got my spies." "You can't keep a secret from the Thought Police." "Ha ha! Cranium is a maniac too," Dr. Maniac cried. "Maniacs rule! Maniacs rule!" He did a crazy dance, but he had to stop when his legs got all tangled in his cape. "Our job was to frighten you out of Horrorland," Cranium said. "Once we got you to Panic Park, our job was to get your fear level to the top. The Menace is very smart. He knew we would be your worst nightmares come true." "Why are you telling us all this?" I demanded. "Silence," Crawler hissed. "No one can keep a secret from the Thought Police, not even the Menace. I just read his mind," Cranium continued. "Just now, just this second, and what I learned I didn't like." "What did you learn?" I asked. Cranium narrowed his eyes. "When you hit 100 on the fear meter and Panic Park returns to the world, he plans to keep you prisoners in the park forever, and us too." "All of us?" I gasped. "He plans to keep us all prisoners," Cranium said. "He's not going to let any of us go home after the job is done." "I still don't understand why you're telling us this," I said. "Because we need your help," Dr. Maniac screamed. "Huh?" We all gasped and cried out in surprise. Slappy shook his head. "I can't believe I'm saying this," he said, "but we have to work together with you losers." "It's the only way we can defeat him," Cranium said. "The only way we can destroy him." Matt's mouth hung open. He squinted hard at Cranium and Slappy. "You're joking, right?" "Let me get this right. You want us to help you destroy the Menace," Boone said slowly. "You have to stand up to him," Cranium said. Matt laughed. "For sure." He turned to the rest of us. "Don't you get it? It's a trap, a trick. It's the final scare that puts the meter over the top, and these guys win." "No way," Michael shouted to the row of villains. "No way we'll help you. No way." And we all began to chant, "No way! No way!" As I chanted along with everyone, I saw the villains' expressions change. I saw the evil settle over their faces. I saw the grim, cold stares as their eyes narrowed. I felt a chilling fear. I felt fear freeze every muscle of my body as the villains began to move in for the final chapter, the final attack. Chapter 26. We had no place to run. The villains moved quickly. They pressed us against the building wall. Slappy's eyes rolled with excitement as he strode stiffly up to me. Before I could duck away, he pressed his wooden face against my ear, and rasped in my ear. "We don't like you, and you don't like us, but you freaks are the only ones who can stand up to him." "Stand up to him?" I asked. "What do you mean? How can we stand up to the Menace?" "You have to show him you have no fear," Cranium replied. "He needs your fear energy to keep his park alive. If your fear level goes down, the Menace is weakened." "Stand up to him. Stand in front of him and laugh in his face," Dr. Maniac declared. He tossed back his head and whinnied like a horse. "Something like that." "I told you, I read his mind. Here's what I learned. If you all stand in front of him and show no fear, Cranium continued. The menace will vanish, and so will Panic Park. If you stare him down, his world will start to shrink. The menace in the park will grow tinier and tinier until it's just a memory. Hey, Luke chimed in, if it's so easy, why don't you do it? It be far from a job for a fearless pirate, Long Ben answered. I be feared in all the 17 seas. Is your leg made of wood or your head? Slappy rasped at the pirate. There are only 7 seas. I've been places you've never even dreamed of, dummy, the pirate scowled. One more word against the captain and I'll be using your head for my anchor. And I'll bite your other leg, Slappy cried, snapping his jaws loudly at Captain Ben. Peace, peace, Maniac shouted. Cranium turned back to us. We can't defeat the menace, Cranium said, and the menace isn't measuring our fear. He's measuring yours. You are the humans. He grabbed my wrist and slid his hand over my bracelet. It's very hot. The fear level is high. The menace is measuring the fear in all of you. So you losers have to do it, Slappy said. You have to go back to his mansion. You have to find him. Show him you're not a bit afraid. Make the bracelets go cold. Stare him down, Cranium said. When your fear level goes up, when your fear level goes down, he will shrink away. The menace and Panic Park will shrink away. Once he is tiny and weak, we know how to escape. Do it now, Maniac screamed. Matt turned to the rest of us. What do you think? He asked. Is this a trap? Can we trust them? No, Michael answered. We can't trust them. But do we have a choice? His second face spun around. Blah, 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 it said. It stuck out its long black forked tongue. Michael's real face spun back. See what I mean? Look at us. We're totally ruined. Ruined! I think we have to try it. It can't get any worse, can it? Famous last words. Chapter 27. Inspector Cranium and Dr. Maniac led the way to the Menace's mansion on the other side of the park. The rest of the villains scattered. We walked in silence, past the rides and games and empty restaurants, all colorless and gray. Did I feel tense? 3 guesses. My throat was so tight I could barely swallow. My heart fluttered as I had a flock of birds in my chest. Were we walking into a trap? Could we really be brave enough to stare down the menace? A group of horrors were huddled near a line of tall trees. They stopped talking and turned to watch us as we passed. I thought the HorrorLand horrors were on our side, Matt said to Cranium. I thought Ned ordered them to protect us. What are they doing here in Panic Park? These horrors work for Byron, Cranium replied. He brought them here. Dangerous fellows, Maniac added. They're not human. They'll do anything. Like me! Ha 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 ha! No one else laughed. We stepped into the shadow of the tall mansion. Crows cawed, circling the tower roofs. 4 shadow people stood stiff and alert at the top of the front stairs. Guards. Follow us, Cranium said. There's a door at the side. It isn't guarded. You can sneak in there. The Menace's study is just down the hall. My bracelet began to tingle. The heat burned my wrist. I knew my fear level had to be up near the top of the meter. Did everyone else feel as afraid as I did? If so, we were doomed to fail. How could we show the Menace that we weren't afraid of him if we were all shaking like leaves? We pressed ourselves close to the stone wall and crept to the side entrance, a black door hidden by a low arc. The door had no handle or knob. How do we open it? Carly Beth whispered. Maybe I can use my key card, Matt said. He reached into his jeans pocket. He searched all his pockets. Oh wow, he muttered. It's gone. I must have left it in that elevator. No problem, Cranium answered. I have some useful brain powers. He stared hard at the door and concentrated. After a few seconds, the door slowly swung open. Quickly, quickly, Cranium motioned us inside. Are you coming with us? I whispered. We can't, Cranium replied. If he sees us, he'll know something's up. You're on your own. Don't blow it, Maniac cried. Remember, no fear, Cranium whispered. Stare him down. Make the fear meter sink lower and lower. We made our way into the house. I gazed around. We stood in a long, dark hallway. The walls were solid black. The ceiling was low. I saw narrow doorways along the hall. The doors were all closed. We began to walk. The carpet beneath our shoes was thick. We moved silently. Matt led the way. His hands were balled into tight fists at his sides. Michael walked behind him, his eyes narrowed, his whole body tense. On the back of his head, his monster face drooled down his shirt. Abby and Julie walked together, hugging themselves to stop their trembling. The two shadows, Carly Beth and Billy, floated behind them. The rest of us followed, moving silently, our eyes alert, hearts pounding. We turned a corner. The next hall was also empty. Large black and white portraits lined the walls, portraits of the menace, dozens of them. Their eyes seemed to follow us as we crept silently past. Matt raised a hand, signaling us to stop. I saw an open door at the corner, the first open door, the lights on, someone behind the door. We pushed a little closer. I sucked in my breath when I realized we were staring at the menace. Luke grabbed my arm. Everyone froze. My bracelet burned a ring of pain into my wrist. The menace sat behind a big black desk, his study. He leaned over an open book. His black hair fell over his forehead as he read. I forced myself to breathe. My legs were trembling. How could I be brave? How could any of us be brave in the face of so much evil? Matt waved us forward. We shuffled slowly toward the study door. This was it, I knew. This was the moment, our last chance. Would we fail? Would we survive? Moving together, we stepped up to the doorway. And Byron burst out of the study into the doorway. He stretched his arms straight out to block our way. Sorry, guys, he said, visiting hours are on Tuesdays. Chapter 28. Matt shoved Byron hard in the chest. Michael headbutted him. Byron staggered back. We pushed our way into the study and gathered in front of the menace's desk. Tall bookshelves were lined up behind him. A fear meter stood in the corner. The red line bobbed to 95. No fear, I cried. The words burst from my mouth, but I was shaking so hard I couldn't think straight. Abby and Julie picked up the chant. No fear, they said, and everyone repeated it. The menace raised his head slowly from his book. His dark eyes moved down the line, stopping for a few seconds on each one of us. We all stared back. We didn't blink. We locked our eyes on him. No fear, no fear, no fear. Luke grabbed my hand. I grabbed Sheena's hand. We all held hands and kept up the chant. No fear, no fear. As we chanted, I could feel my fear slipping away. I felt stronger. I felt it working. No fear, no fear, no fear. We can do this, I thought. We can stare him down. We can defeat him. The red line on the fear meter hadn't moved. It stayed at 95. The menace slowly closed his book. He clasped his hands on top of his desk. He stared back at us for a while. His face was blank, no expression at all. His dark eyes didn't reveal a thing. No fear, no fear. And then the menace slapped his hands down on the desktop. He tossed back his head and laughed. How stupid can you be? He shouted. We cut off our chant. Luke and Sheena let go of my hands. The menace jumped to his feet. His desk chair clattered back against the bookshelves behind him. Do you really think a staring contest can defeat me? He boomed. Or me? His second face cried. The red line on the fear meter jumped to 97. The menace leaned over his desk, and I saw a computer keyboard in front of him. He tapped a few keys. Let's see what we can do, he muttered to himself. I heard a loud hum. The whole room started to vibrate. The menace tapped more keys on his keyboard. Let's see. A cold smile spread over his face. You evil thing, his red face cried. You wouldn't do that to them, would you? The menace nodded. He tapped more keys. No fear, he said. Is that your slogan? Well, my slogan is more fear. The room vibrated harder. I could feel the floor move beneath my shoes. My ear itched. I felt strange. Suddenly I couldn't hear well. I reached up to scratch my ear and felt something warm and wet inside it. Oh no. A moan escaped my throat as I pulled something from my ear. A worm. A fat brown worm. I held it up in front of me. I could hear kids screaming all around me, but I could only think about the worm, alive, wriggling between my fingers. And then I gagged and reached into my mouth. I pulled another fat, sticky worm from under my tongue. I turned and saw Boone pulling worms from his nose. Worms dangled from both his nostrils. I saw worms crawling in Sabrina's hair. She started to tug at them, screaming and pulling them from her scalp. Beside me, Sheena pulled a long worm from her mouth. It seemed to stretch as she pulled it. She kept spitting, and another worm poked out from between her lips. Kids cried and screamed for help. We struggled and squirmed and choked, pulling worm after worm from our mouths, our ears, our noses. Go ahead, the menace exclaimed. Why aren't you staring at me now? Go ahead. See how it works out for you. Oh no, I let out a sharp cry when I saw the fear meter. At the top, the red line had climbed to 99. We never should have listened to those villains, Matt screamed. We've been tricked. It's a trap, a horrible trap. Chapter 29. I pulled a worm from my hair and tossed it to the floor. Worms slithering around our shoes. Sabrina pulled one from her nose. I kept licking my lips. I couldn't get the worm taste from my mouth. My brain leapt crazily from thought to thought. We had to do something. We were as good as dead. And suddenly, a joke popped into my head. A joke Luke had told me. I turned to him. What's worse than finding a worm in your apple? I asked. Finding half a worm. He stared at me. Then he giggled. I gasped. Did the room shake? Did I really see everything shrink a little? Luke, keep laughing, I said. I glanced at the fear meter. The red line had dropped to 98. Lizzie, Luke said, what's the last thing that goes through a bug's mind when it hits a windshield? I shrugged. The rest of its body, Luke said. We both laughed. Again, I felt the room jolt. This time, I was sure. I really did see everything in it shrink. Sheena and Sabrina laughed. Tell that one to the others, Sabrina said. Luke repeated his joke. Everyone laughed. The red line on the fear meter sank to 90. Stop, the menace screamed. Stop it, you're making us shrink. We kept laughing. I kicked worms off my shoes, tossed back my head, and laughed. What do you get when you cut a worm in two? Luke shouted. The menace! It didn't make much sense, but we all laughed anyway. We laughed and laughed. Stop it! Stop it! Right now! Both the menace's faces were screaming now. I'm warning you, we're shrinking, growing tinier. Our laughter washed away our fear. As our fear faded, the red line on the meter sank lower and lower. 80, 70. Stop it, the menace screeched again. Can't you see? Can't you see what's happening? And then his words sent a chill of horror over the room and silenced us all. Don't you fools realize what you're doing? Don't you see that if Panic Park shrinks away, you'll be nowhere? If Panic Park disappears, you disappear with it. Chapter 30. He's lying, Michael shouted. He knows we're beating him, and so he's lying. Keep laughing, guys, Sheena cried. Let's shrink him away. Let's watch that meter drop. No, wait, Boone said. Maybe he's telling the truth. If Panic Park vanishes, where will we be? Maybe we just vanished too, I said. We'll never get home, Sabrina murmured. That means he's telling the truth, I said. Yes, everything looks the same. That means we're shrinking along with everything else. And as he said those words, the red line on the fear meter jumped back to 80. That's more like it, the menace cried. Way to go, guys, his red face exclaimed. Be afraid, be very afraid. Matt turned to the rest of us. His dark eyes were wild with fear. What choice do we have? If we defeat the menace, if we make him and his park shrink and disappear, maybe we disappear too. But we're also dead meat if we make the meter go all the way up, Carly Beth said. The menace grinned. Go ahead, talk about it. Talk about how scared you are. I love it. Love it. We stared at him. Both of his faces were grinning now, urging us on. The red line on the fear meter was quickly sliding back to the top, and then I heard Byron shout behind us. I turned to see him scuffling with Dr. Maniac. The two wrestled for a moment, and then Maniac swung his cape around Byron. He twisted it around and struck the struggling horror. Then he unfurled it fast and sent Byron spinning out of the room. Slappy and Spectre Cranium with Dr. Crawler wrapped around his arm, the staggering mummy, and Captain Ben marching into the room behind Dr. Maniac. The ugly mask floated in the doorway, its lips bobbing silently up and down. What is the meaning of this? The menace shouted angrily. When I want you freaks, I'll rattle your cages. Slappy stepped up to the desk. He stared at the menace. His painted lips were locked in an evil grin. Who ever said 2 heads are better than 1? He cried. You're an insult to the word ugly. The other villains laughed. The room shook. I could feel it shrink. When you were born, the doctor slapped the wrong end, Slappy told the menace. That made us all laugh. The red line sank to 50 on the meter. Slappy leaned toward the menace. When your mother asked your father to take out the garbage, she meant you. More laughter. Is that your face, or did your neck puke up your breakfast this morning? Keep laughing, everyone, Cranium shouted. He turned to the menace and shook a fist in the air. We're not afraid of you anymore. The menace shook his fist back and let out an angry squeal. His voice was tiny now. He was growing smaller. Stop it! Stop it! Are you crazy? He whined in his little voice. I gasped as his second face started to change. Its eyes closed. Its mouth drooped. It let out a long, low moan. And as I stared in shock, the red color faded to gray. The nose melted like candle wax, dripped over the sagging, melting lips. Look at that, I cried, pointing. We all gasped in shocks as the menace's second face melted away. It folded over itself, like cake batter pouring out of a bowl, and dripped slowly down the back of the menace's black jacket. Are you crazy? Are you crazy? The menace repeated in his tiny voice. Look what you've done! He was my only friend! You'll pay! You'll all pay! Slappy raised his face to the ceiling and cackled. Dr. Crawler hissed and snapped his powerful jaws. The villains were cheering and celebrating. The red line on the fear meter had dropped out of sight. But I couldn't be happy about it. A jolt of fear tightened my throat. Stop, I cried. The menace is shrinking. The room is shrinking. But what will happen to us? If everything disappears... Are we all going to disappear? Matt cried. The room grew silent. Dr. Maniac's mouth dropped open. Uh-oh, he murmured. This was all your idea, Slappy rasped at the Maniac. Maniac shook his head. My bad. We might be in a little trouble here, guys. Does anyone have a plan B? Chapter 31. Cranium turned to the door. We've got to hurry, he said. It's all shrinking, Dr. Crawler hissed. I can feel it. The menace's whole world, it's shrinking away. We've got to run before it's too late, Slappy rasped. Do you really think you can defeat Karloff Menace? Do you really think you can defeat the Menace? The Menace pounded his little desk with his black-gloved hands. I know the way out. Follow me, Cranium ordered. Maybe we can make it in time. We all turned and stampeded from the office. The Menace's cries rang after us as we thundered down the long hall. Where are we going? Luke asked, trotting beside me. What makes you think these guys know where they're going? Do we have a choice? I replied. My poor brother couldn't hide his fear, but we were all scared. How much time did we have before Panic Park totally disappeared? Ride the whirlwind. I read the sign above the entrance to the low white building as we ran up to it. Here we are, Dr. Maniac called, pointing to the sign. Everybody in. Wait a minute, Matt grabbed his arm. What are you trying to do to us? Yeah, Michael said. The Menace told us about the whirlwind. He said it scrambles your brain. He said it turns your brain to mush. The Menace was lying, Slappy rasped. He was trying to frighten you away from this building. We've all used the whirlwind to go back and forth to Horrorland, Cranium said. Brittany and Molly used it once. It's faster than the mirrors. I turned to Brittany. Is he telling the truth? Is this the building you used to return to Horrorland? Brittany scrunched up her face. Maybe, she replied. I remember it was very windy. We pushed up to the entrance. I could hear the ferocious wind inside, thundering against the walls, whistling as it blew. A chill ran down my back. Would it be like stepping into a hurricane? I heard a shout behind us. I turned and saw the Menace and Byron running across the park toward us. A big group of shadow people followed close behind them. Don't look back at them, Slappy ordered. Quick, you dummies. Open the door, jump into the whirlwind, and we're all out of here. But I couldn't turn away from the Menace and the others, running closer, as the whole park shrank away. The rides, the food carts, the buildings, the trees, everything growing smaller, about to vanish. And it should have 40 years ago. Matt grabbed the entrance door handle. It's padlocked, he shouted. It's locked tight. I glanced back and gasped. I saw Jillian and Jackson, the two traitors, the Menace's spies. They were speeding toward us, far in front of the others, and I could see the hard glares on their faces. They're coming to stop us, I cried. They're coming to keep us out of the whirlwind. Hurry, Slappy screamed at Matt. Matt tugged hard on the padlock. He opened it, jerking it with all his strength. He pulled it, jerking it with all his strength. It won't budge, he cried. We're locked out. Chapter 32. Jillian and Jackson stormed up to the entrance. Get away, Carly Beth screamed. Look at me. I'm a shadow. Look at all of us. Haven't we suffered enough because of you? I glanced back. Panic Park was tiny now, like a world inside a snow globe. The Menace and Byron looked like little mice scrambling toward us. You've got to believe us, Jillian cried. Jackson and I, we didn't know our powers came from the Menace. We didn't know he was controlling us. Cranium put headphones over our ears. He said it was a brain test, Jackson cried. But that's when the Menace took control of us. We didn't want to work for him, Jillian added. He forced us, but now he can't control us. His power has shrunk with him. I'll prove we're on your side, Jackson said. I can open the door. I'll help you, Cranium cried, bumping up next to Jackson. The two of them concentrated on the padlock. And the lock snapped off. I screamed as the door flew open. A ferocious blast of cold wind slammed the door against the front wall. Blast after blast roared out of the building. I saw Matt shouting something to the rest of us, but I couldn't hear him over the thunderous wind. Matt lowered his head and dove into the wind. I couldn't breathe. The cold wind slammed into me like an ocean wave. I toppled onto my back. Luke pulled me to my feet. We screamed as the wind lifted both of us off the ground. Another blast swirled around us and pulled us to the building. As I sailed into the swirling gusts, I glanced back, one last look at Panic Park. It was so tiny now, nothing left, just a shiny bubble floating against the colorless sky, and then the bubble popped. I spun away and hurtled into the whirlwind. A powerful gust swept under me and lifted me, carried me over the floor. Like flying, I thought, flying out of control. Flying where? I soared high in a long blue tunnel, then floated lower. I could see the other kids ahead of me, and then a tidal wave of wind swept me around, and the kids were behind me. I pressed my hands over my ears, struggling to shut out the roar. I closed my eyes and let the wind carry me through the long blue tunnel. And then I felt a hard tug, and I began to spin, harder, whirling as if I were in the center of a raging cyclone. And then the wind stopped. Silence, a sudden, horrifying silence. The wind stopped and let go of me, and I started to drop, straight down, down. I screamed all the way. Chapter 33. I landed gently on my feet. Warm air brushed my face. Dizzy, my body swayed, so hard to stand. The fierce wind was gone, but I could still feel it tingling my skin. I took a deep breath and held it and gazed around. Luke, are you okay? I guess. My brother stood right next to me, shaking off the chill of the swirling winds. Where are we? I spun around and saw Carly Beth, not a shadow. She and Billy were staring at each other, their faces shocked at first and then grinning with relief. We're back. We're not shadows. Robbie held his hands in front of his face. I can see myself. I'm not invisible. Yay! And we all cheered when we saw Brittany with her normal head. Abby and Julie had stopped shaking, and Michael was back to having only one face. We're back. We're back to normal. And we started to celebrate even before we realized we were standing in a parking lot. I saw the green and purple entrance sign, rows and rows away from us. It's HorrorLand, I shouted, pumping my fists in the air. Yes, we were standing in the HorrorLand parking lot. And before we could celebrate for long, there were our parents. Everyone's parents, moving down the row of cars toward us. Dad studied his watch. You're late, he said. Where have you all been? Where have you been all this time? I blurted out. Mom wrinkled up her forehead. Didn't they tell you, Lizzie? They took all of us adults to our own hotel. We had a great time. We made so many friends. Dad frowned. But we've been waiting for you kids here. Time to go home. I glanced around at the other family reunions. Lots of hugs and happy greetings. I whispered at Luke. None of them have any idea of the danger we were in. Look at them all, grinning and laughing, clueless. Let's keep it that way, Luke said. How could we ever explain it? A green and purple horror watched from the side. He had a smile on his face. I walked over to him. You're Ned, aren't you? I asked. His smile grew wider. Monster X to you, he said. Thank you, I said. I think we all want to thank you. Come on, you two, Dad called. We have a long drive ahead of us. He gave us a push toward the car. Lizzie, look at your hair, Mom said, brushing it down with her hand. It's all wild and crazy. Why is it such a mess? I went on a very fast ride, I said. That night, how happy was I to be back in my own bedroom? 3 guesses. But as I started to unpack, I couldn't get Panic Park out of my mind. I thought about the little shadow girl pleading with me in that faraway voice. Find me. Can you find me? I pictured that black and white world, the dark, empty buildings, the rides and shops and restaurants all closed, all shades of gray, shades from another world. And again I saw the park shrinking away, growing smaller and smaller, so tiny and then gone. A whole park, a whole world, gone with a tiny pop. I yawned. I was so tired. I could barely keep my eyes open. I pulled out pairs of jeans from the suitcase. They were still folded. I never had a chance to wear them. And what was this? My hand felt something hard and big. Something taking up all the room in my suitcase. I pushed aside some t-shirts and gasped. Oh no. I lifted it out of the case, a ventriloquist dummy. I rubbed its painted hair. It had an ugly grin on its wooden lips. How did this thing get in my suitcase? I murmured. And then I let out a cry as the dummy's eyes slowly opened and its ugly grin grew wider. Well, well, it rasped in a teeny voice. Looking good, Lizzie. It blinked its eyes and gazed up at me. Ready to start a whole new story? This one will really give you goosebumps. Ha 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 ha. The end. Fear file number 12. So you open the fear file, and on the left side, paper clipped, is looks like a business card, another business card. If I had to guess, one of those is Dr. Cranium's business card, Thought Police, and then like a note, all paper clipped, and the note says, I think I know what this token is trying to tell us. Then it's got one token with what looks like a horror on it, and backwards is engraved, Evil lurks with in the maze. And then the other token has the picture of the carousel. I would guess it's the flaming carousel, except this one doesn't appear to be on fire to me. And then backwards has engraved, Fear rules in. Fear rules in. On the other side of the fear file, it has a paper. It's got the HorrorLand logo on top, and it says, Dear very special guest, from time to time we conduct guest surveys to see how you're enjoying your stay and what you're learning about our amusement park. Please complete the following survey and leave it at the Crocodile Cafe. You will receive a complimentary token. Horrors hate to be pinched. True or false? Snakes are a horror's best friend. True or false? The Ferris wheel is the scariest ride in Horrorland. True or false? Dr. Maniac was raised in Werewolf Village. True or false? Byron's codename is The Keeper. True or false? There is no 13th floor in Stagger Inn. True or false? I know most of them. Okay. And then in handwritten letters, it says, It's a trap. They want to see how much we know. No doy. Anyway, here's the first one. These two tokens and that note. And then here is the survey. And then there's map number 12. It's got a sign called Spider House, and then like a building made out of a large spider. So it's like, it looks like a large spider on top of a building with double doors. Next to it is the, what is that? Looks like a tower that things hang off of. Might be a ride. There's in the middle eyeballs on a stick stand, balloons, and then a small brick building with a door and pillars. It's map number 12, and it connects to map number 4. Map number 4 would go over here, and this is map number 12. Okay. This book is your ticket to www.enterhorrorland.com. Checklist number 12. I scream, you scream, we all scream for frozen eyeballs? Take time for a tasty treat, Horrorland style. Uh-oh, black balloons on the loose. This can't be good. Step right up to the freeball bungee jump. Hope you're not afraid of heights. Question. What's teeming with tarantulas and swarming with spiders? Answer. You are, unless you can fight your way out of this dangerous web. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the scariest of them all? Okay, we are done with book 12, and therefore we are done with the Goosebumps HorrorLand series. I have to say, I enjoyed it. I never got to finish it as a child. Now I have. If any of the people watching this have watched, all of the books, be reading them, I'd say thank you for sticking around. And if no one has stuck around, I would honestly say, well, that's fine. I'm doing this for me. But I didn't expect to get any subscribers, and I got quite a few. So, again, thank you for watching. Thank you for taking this journey with me. It was a good one.